James Tiptree Jr. The Double Life of Alice B. Sheldon by Julie Phillips, 2006. Alice Bradley Sheldon was born in Chicago in 1915. As a child, she crossed Africa with her explorer parents. Later, she became a painter, a CIA agent, a psychologist, and at age 51, made yet another career change. James Tiptree Jr. appeared on the science fiction scene in 1967. His stories were fast-paced and hard-boiled, his letters frank and sensitive. For nearly 10 years, he carried on intimate correspondences with fellow writers Philip K. Dick, Harlan Ellison, and Ursula K. Guin. But no one knew who he really was. Then, assumptions about writing and gender were demolished when he was revealed to be Alice B. Sheldon. Welcome to Vintage SF. I'm Richard Rempel. Today we're going to take a look at one of the best biographies I've ever read of a science fiction writer. Strike that, one of the best biographies I've ever read. Author Julie Phillips is meticulous in her research, but what stands out even more is she knows how to weave the story around the facts. Let's take a brief look at the table of contents and highlight a few things. The edition I read, which is currently available for purchase, was 460 pages long, and it was divided into 40 chapters. That's approximately 12 pages per chapter. We're going to touch on the introduction, who is Tiptree, what is he, in a moment. Tiptree was born Alice Bradley, and her parents, Herbert and Mary Bradley, were socialites in Chicago. They had a penthouse apartment and loved to go on adventures, specifically safaris to Africa. Mary wrote stories about these adventures which sold well. From her privileged childhood and these safaris, we go on to her girls' school and her coming-of-age party. A quick and troubled marriage preceded World War II. There was a divorce, and a new love was found during the war. Ting Sheldon. Alice Bradley becomes Alice Bradley Sheldon. Both Ting and Alice came from privileged families, so following the war, there is a variety of careers for both of them, including a time for both of them in the CIA. After 246 pages, we get to the birth of a writer. From 1967 to 1976, no one knew who James Tiptree Jr. really was. He was a celebrated male author, winning awards. There was a sense of mystery around James Tiptree Jr. And then, shortly after Alice's mother's death, Tiptree is revealed. I'll tell you a bit of that story a little later in this video. Alice B. Sheldon lives for another 10 years following that revelation, and now writes with people knowing that she is James Tiptree Jr. You can see at the end we have acknowledgments, note on sources, works by Alice B. Sheldon, notes, bibliography, and an index. So let's talk first about Alice, or Allie as she was known, before she became Tiptree. A major theme in this book is her sexuality. She was attracted to females, but she married men. There's a lot of frank talk about her sexual attraction and her frustrations. These also go into issues of gender. It's interesting to see later on that she chooses another gender and embraces it in a way when she is a writer. There's also a deep examination of mental health, in particular depression. In her 60s, Alice was diagnosed with cyclothymia, a form of bipolar disorder in which depression alternates with periods of high energy, or hypomania. Cyclothymia is essentially manic depression without the mania, but, at least in Alice's case, with all the grim emotional depths. Whatever the source of Alice's depressions, they came to her with frightening persistence. No matter what she did to eliminate the causes of unhappiness, she would suddenly, without warning, without apparent cause, be overwhelmed by despair. And further down the page, one of the central stories of Alice's life is of a solitary struggle with depression. Suicide is part of that story. When she couldn't stand it anymore, she promised herself suicide as a way out. She felt this made life a choice, not an obligation. I'll talk a little bit more about her death at the end of the video. Now let's take a look at the deception of Tiptree using this pseudonym. Here is a first quotation from the beginning of the introduction. "No one has, to my knowledge, ever met Tiptree, ever seen him, ever talked with him on the phone. No one knows where he lives, what he looks like, what he does for a living. He volunteers no information about his personal life and politely refuses to answer questions about it. Most SF people are wild to know who Tiptree really is." Gardner Dozos in 1976, right before they do find out who Tiptree is. And how do they find out? Well, in late 1976, Tiptree told a few friends that his elderly mother had died. More than one of Tip's correspondents checked the Chicago papers and found an obituary for Mary Hastings Bradley, novelist, travel writer, and African explorer. Under survivors was listed her only child, Alice Bradley, Mrs. Huntington Sheldon. 10 years later, shortly before her death by suicide, Alice Sheldon wrote, "My secret world had been invaded, and the attractive figure of Tiptree, he did strike several people as attractive, was revealed as nothing but an old lady in Virginia." Tiptree was more than a pseudonym for Sheldon. Tiptree was that person for Alice, a writer who, he once said, longed to stop sweating over words and drafts and instead storm naked with heart-on waving through the world, spouting whatever comes. Tiptree helped Alice to write partly because he wrote science fiction. Literature, with its famous injunction to write what you know, cannot always help us discover what we don't know. Science fiction gave Alice a language for writing around the boundaries, for imagining what cannot yet be said. It has been seen as a masculine genre, and yet, with its metaphors for alienation and otherness, its unruly imagination, and its power to predict change, it is highly suited to talking about women's experience. Alice chose her male pseudonym on a whim in a supermarket where a jar of Tiptree jam caught Alice's eye. She was sending out some science fiction stories as a joke, and she wanted a name editors wouldn't remember rejecting. But the male name turned out to have many uses. It made her feel taken seriously when she wrote about what she knew: guns, hunting, politics, war. It let her write the way she wanted to write, with an urgency that was hers. It gave her enough distance and control to speak honestly about herself. Being outed as Tiptree really was a loss in her life and in her writing. The best of her writing came before people knew that Tiptree was Alice Sheldon. One of her best-known works is Houston, Houston, Do You Read Me?, a novella that won both the Hugo and the Nebula Awards. My friend Chris from Liminal Spaces and I have reviewed this novella. It was part of a Tor double. I'll put a link to both the spoiler-free review and the deep dive that we did into this novella. If you're looking for a place to start with the works of James Tiptree Jr., one of the best places to go is a collection that was considered to be the best of James Tiptree Jr. Her Smoke Rose Up Forever was collected in 1990. You can see the SF Masterworks edition right here. One of the things that I like about this edition is that it has two introductions, one by Graham Sleight and a second introduction by John Clute. Houston, Houston, Do You Read Me? Is included in Her Smoke Rose Up Forever. When referring to Tiptree in the biography, the author will use male pronouns. So we talk about his relationship with Ursula K. Guin and Joanna Russ. A particularly interesting part of this is how the science fiction community and friends of Tiptree reacted to the outing, to finding out that he was a she. There's much to explore in this biography, and it is a really interesting study into a very complicated person. I really thought that Julie Phillips' writing was insightful, and it was a story to be read. It gave us a feel for Alice's complexity, her charisma, and her writing. As Alice and Ting aged, there were medical issues. Ting started to lose his eyesight. He was about 12 years older than Alice. Alice pressed Ting to agree to go out together. But in the heartbreaking end, we see evidence that he didn't want to go, but they did go together. This powerful and tragic ending was another shock to those who loved Alice B. Sheldon. James Tiptree Jr., The Double Life of Alice B. Sheldon, is an amazing biography. It gives us a glimpse into the 20th century, into women's roles, and one woman who fought against those roles. Whether you like science fiction or not, I think this is a fascinating biography. I do want to caution that this book might not be for everyone. The issues of sexuality, gender, murder, and suicide are things that could be very upsetting to some. I, however, found this to be an honest, powerful look at a charismatic person. I give it my highest rating, 10 out of 10. Highly recommended. Now, there's one thing I'd like to show you on the author Julie Phillips' website. It's julie-phillips.com. In the About section, it says, I am an American biographer and book critic and the author of The Baby on the Fire Escape, Creativity, Mothering, and the Mind-Baby Problem. That's from Norton in 2022. And then the previous book was the one we just talked about. It's received several honors, including the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Hugo and Locus Awards, and the Washington State Book Award. But here's the sentence that really got me excited. I'm also working on a biography of Ursula K. Le Guin. That biography is one I will pick up as soon as it's available. So now it's your turn. Do you have any thoughts about the works of James Tiptree Jr.? How about this biography? Have you read about Alice B. Sheldon? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, keep reading.